Hey everyone, welcome back to FactSpire channel. Today we're tackling something massive, something that's been buzzing in the back of people's minds more and more lately, the possibility of World War III. It's a heavy topic, no doubt about it, and with everything going on in the world right now, it feels closer than ever. Geopolitical tensions are climbing, nations are flexing their power, and technology's throwing curveballs we've never had to dodge before. So, what's the deal? Are we actually heading toward another global conflict? That's what we're here to unpack. I'm not trying to freak you out, well, maybe a little, just to keep you awake, but I want us to really think about where things might be headed. We're going to dig into history to see what sparked the last big wars, check out what's happening today as of February 21, 2025, and even toss around some predictions from experts and wildcards that could flip the script. I've got some cool tools up my sleeve, too. I can peek at X posts, analyze what's trending online, and pull in web info to keep this as fresh as it gets. This is going to be a long ride, so grab a snack, hit that like button if you're ready, subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's dive in. First, we need to figure out what a world war even means, because it's not just any old fight. When you think about World War I and World War II, they weren't just big battles. They were earth-shaking events that pulled in dozens of countries and rewrote the map. World War I kicked off way back in 1914 when some guy shot an archduke in the Balkans. But it wasn't really about that one bullet. It was a mess of alliances, rivalries, and pride that turned a spark into a firestorm. By the time it was over, more than 16 million people were gone, and Europe was a wreck. Then came World War II in 1939, and it was even wilder, 70 to 85 million dead. Cities flattened, and the first time anyone dropped nuclear bombs. Those wars were about empires, resources, and ideology, and they didn't just happen because two countries got mad. They happened because the whole world got tangled up in the fight. So a world war today would need that same kind of chain reaction. You'd have major powers like the United States, China, or Russia stepping into the ring, and smaller nations either joining the fray or getting dragged along for the ride. It's not just about guns and tanks either, it's about who controls what, whether it's oil, trade routes, or even the tech that keeps the world spinning. Back then, it was colonies and coal. Now, it might be the Arctic's melting ice or the chips that power your phone. We've dodged a third one so far. The Cold War got hairy, like that Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 when the US and Soviet Union nearly went nuclear over some missiles 90 miles off Florida. Diplomacy and a healthy dose of fear pulled us back from the edge then, but things are different in 2025. The Soviet Union's history, China's a giant, and tech like drones and AI are rewriting how wars even work. Could it happen again? Let's zoom in on the world right now and see where the trouble's brewing. Picture the globe like a chessboard, and there are a few spots where the pieces are stacked up, ready to tip over. Take Ukraine for starters. Russia rolled in back in 2022, and as we sit here in 2025, that war is still dragging on. NATO's been pumping Ukraine with weapons and cash, but they haven't sent troops. Not yet, anyway. If Russia pushes past Ukraine into, say, Poland or one of the Baltic states, that's a whole new game. NATO's got this rule, Article 5, that says an attack on one is an attack on all. Suddenly you've got the US, UK, Germany, and a dozen others staring down Russia. Moscow's got friends, too. Iran, maybe North Korea, and what started as a regional scrap could blow up into something global. Then there's the Middle East, always a hot mess. Israel's been tangling with Hamas and Hezbollah, and Iran's lurking in the background, backing those groups against the US and its allies. Right now, in February 2025, there's a shaky ceasefire holding, but it's like a threadbare rope in a tug of war. If Iran ramps up its nuclear program or Israel launches a big strike, you could see a regional war spiral out of control. The US might jump in, Saudi Arabia too, and Russia or China could wade in to protect their oil interests. Speaking of oil, that's the kicker. Any disruption there could crash the global economy, forcing everyone to pick a side. Don't forget the South China Sea and Taiwan. China's claiming that whole stretch of water, but the Philippines, Vietnam, and others are pushing back, with the US sailing warships through to keep it open. Taiwan's the real pressure point, though. China says it's theirs. The US and others say it's independent. If China invades, the US might step in, and Japan, Australia, and South Korea could follow. That's a Pacific showdown with the potential to go worldwide. And while we're at it, keep an eye on the Arctic. It's warming up, ice is melting, and there's oil, gas, and new shipping lanes up for grabs. Russia's got a huge chunk of that turf and a fleet of icebreakers to back it up. China's sniffing around, and NATO's talking about staking a claim. If someone starts throwing elbows over who owns what, that could heat up fast. These aren't just random fights kicking off in the middle of nowhere. They involve nuclear powers or their buddies, and they're tied to stuff that keeps the world running: energy, trade, pride. A slip-up in any of these places could domino into something much bigger. But it's not just about where the trouble starts, it's about who's playing the game. Let's talk about the big players who could steer us into or out of this mess. The United States is still the heavyweight champ when it comes to military might. They've got bases sprinkled across the planet, a navy that owns the oceans, and enough nuclear warheads to make anyone think twice. They're locked into alliances like NATO, plus deals with Japan, South Korea, and Australia. If a war breaks out, the US is in it, either leading the charge or reacting to someone else's first move. China, though, is the new kid on the block who's grown up fast. Their economy's a juggernaut, their military's sleek and modern, and they've got big plans, reuniting with Taiwan, stretching their influence through trade projects like the Belt and Road. They don't have a tight alliance like NATO, but they're buddying up with Russia and keeping North Korea in their orbit. If China makes a play, it's not just about winning a fight, it's about rewriting who runs the show. Russia's a different beast. They're not the Soviet superpower they once were, but they've still got a stockpile of nukes, a talent for causing headaches, and a leader who doesn't flinch. Ukraine's their current fixation, but they're also cozying up to China and Iran. If Russia gets backed into a corner, they could lash out and pull others into the fray. Then you've got Iran and North Korea, smaller but spicy. Iran's got drones, missiles, and proxy groups like Hezbollah ready to stir the pot. North Korea's got nuclear toys and a habit of rattling cages. They won't start a world war solo, but as sidekicks to Russia or China, they could turn a spark into an inferno. There are other players too. India's got nukes and a tense border with China. The European Union's a mixed bag. Germany and France have weight, but they don't always move as one. Japan and the UK are tight with the US and pack serious firepower. If the world splits into teams, these guys will tip the scales. Alliances today aren't as rigid as they were in 1914, though. Trade keeps things complicated. China and the US might glare at each other, but they're also swapping billions in goods. That could keep the peace, or it could snap if the pressure gets too high. So, who's fighting who? Maybe it's the US and NATO versus a Russia-China bloc, with extras tagging along. Or maybe it's a chaotic free-for-all where regional beefs merge into one giant mess. What could actually light the fuse? That's where we're headed next. So we've got the hot spots and the players lined up. Now, what could actually kick this thing off? History shows it's often something small that snowballs. A shot, a shipwreck, a misunderstanding. Let's run through some ways it might happen in 2025. Imagine a military mix-up. A U.S. destroyer and a Chinese frigate bump in the South China Sea. Tempers flare, someone fires a warning shot that hits and neither side stands down. Or a Russian jet buzzes too close to NATO airspace over the Baltic, gets shot down, and Moscow calls it an act of war. These things happen. Accidents, misjudgments, and with everyone twitchy right now, they could blow up fast. Cyber attacks are another big risk. Picture China or Russia hacking the U.S. power grid, lights out across half the country, hospitals scrambling, markets in freefall. The U.S. retaliates, maybe with missiles instead of code, and it's game on. Cyber's tricky because it's hard to tell what's a prank and what's a declaration of war. And that gray area could drag us in before we know it. Resources could spark it too. Water shortages in the Middle East turning bloody, oil grabs in the Arctic, or fights over rare metals for batteries. Climate change is squeezing what's left, and if nations get desperate, their allies might back them up with guns instead of words. Nuclear moves are the scary one. Say Iran tests a bomb, Israel hits their sights, and the US and Russia pick sides. Or North Korea fires a missile that goes off course, panicking Japan and the US into a counterstrike. Nukes change everything. One slip and it's not just a war, it's a catastrophe. Terrorism, or shadow wars, could do it too. An Iranian-backed group hits a US base, hard. Or Russian mercenaries in Africa tangle with French troops. These low-key conflicts are already simmering. A bold swing could force the big dogs out of hiding. And here's the wild card: technology. What if AI in a military system glitches and launches an attack, or a swarm of drones misfires in a tense zone? Deepfakes could trick a nation into thinking they're under siege, starting a war over nothing. We're playing with tools we barely understand, and they're moving faster than we can keep up. Any of these could be the match that lights the fire. But what would that fire look like? Let's paint the picture of World War III if it actually happens. If World War III breaks out, it's not going to feel like the muddy trenches of 1914. Or the tank clashes of 1944. This is 2025, and war's a different animal now. It'd start fast, missiles raining down, drones buzzing, cyber attacks knocking out grids in hours. You might not see soldiers marching through your town, but your lights could go dark, your phone could die, and your grocery store could empty out overnight. The fighting would be high-tech and far-reaching, with satellites and screens calling the shots more than boots on the ground. Nuclear weapons are the big question mark. Most experts think they'd come late if someone's losing bad. Maybe Russia if Ukraine turns against them, or China if Taiwan slips away. A couple blasts could kill millions, clog the sky with fallout, and make summers vanish for years. A full-on nuclear exchange? Billions gone, cities ash, civilization back to square one? Leaders know this, so they might stick to conventional weapons, missiles, jets, ships, at least until desperation kicks in. Space would be a battlefield too. Satellites getting zapped could blind armies, crash GPS and tank economies. Cyber would hit hard. Imagine hospitals offline, banks frozen, governments scrambling to explain. Drones and AI would run the show on the ground. Ukraine's already shown us how cheap drone swarms can overwhelm tanks and bases. AI could pick targets, move supplies, maybe even decide when to strike without a human saying go. That's freaky. What if it bugs out or gets hacked? The home front wouldn't be safe either. World War II had bombs falling on London. World War III could have disinformation floods turning your neighbor into your enemy. Supply chains would collapse. No gas, no food, riots in weeks. How long would it last? A nuclear war might be over in days, leaving nothing but rubble. A conventional one could grind on for years, nations slugging it out over the last scraps of power. The cost would be insane, trillions in damage, millions fleeing, maybe worse than World War II's chaos adjusted for today's money. Recovery would take decades if we're lucky, with war's mess making climate change even uglier and economies limping along. That's the stakes. So, can we stop it? Let's wrap this up with some hope. We've walked through the risks, the players, the triggers, the nightmare of what could happen. But here's the million-dollar question. Can we avoid World War III? I think we can, and I've got some reasons to back that up. Diplomacy's not dead yet. The Cold War had us on the brink, missiles in Cuba, ships ready to fire, and we talked our way out of it. Today, if leaders sit down over Ukraine or Taiwan, they could cool things off. It's not glamorous, but it's kept us alive before. Money might save us too. China and the US are rivals, yeah, but they're also trading partners. War would gut both their economies and everyone else's. Selfishness could keep the peace like it's done in the past when nations realized fighting cost more than winning. Tech's a wild card, but it's not all doom. It could start a war, sure, but it also gives us eyes everywhere, satellites spotting troop buildups, ex-posts leaking plans. We're not stumbling blind like in 1914. We've got a heads up if we pay attention. And don't count out us, the people. Protests turned the tide in Vietnam. They could do it again. If enough of us scream no, governments have to listen. Plus, the world's more linked than ever. Refugees crossing borders, climate hitting us all, trade tying us together. We're in this mess as a team, whether we like it or not. It's not a done deal. Predictions are just warnings, not destiny. If we see the traps, missteps, cyber attacks, resource fights, we can sidestep them. It's on us to push for leaders who think straight, systems that don't fail, and a world that doesn't torch itself. What do you think? Are we screwed, or can we pull it back? Drop your take in the comments. I'm dying to hear what you've got to say. If this got your brain buzzing, smash that like button, share it with your crew, and subscribe for more deep dives like this. We've covered a ton here, but I could keep going. Let me know if you want a part 2. For now, stay curious, stay sharp, and let's hope we're talking about this as a what if, not a what now. Peace out, fam.